Welcome to the deep dive. We've pulled together a really interesting stack of sources today.
We have indeed.
We're digging into articles, some research papers, notes, all about a topic you might not have heard much about, PIWI grapes.
That's right. Think of this maybe as your shortcut to understanding a whole category of grape that's, well, it's starting to change vineyards around the world.
So our mission today is really to unpack what these are.
Yep. Where they came from, why they're becoming so important now, and, what they offer. For winemaking, for drinkers, even for the planet.
Exactly, because this isn't just some, niche grape variety we're talking about.
No, not at all.
It's really about sustainability meeting quality right there in your glass. And there are some, frankly, eye-opening things here, like how these grapes can mean dramatically less spraying in vineyards. That's huge.
It is, and the potential for wine in completely new regions.
Right. And, of course, what they actually taste like. Which isn't maybe what you'd expect if you hear the word hybrid. They've come a long, long way.
They really have. So let's start right at the beginning. What exactly are these PIWI grapes? I mean, the name itself gives us a pretty big clue.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that. PIWI, I gather it comes from German. Pilzwiderstandsfähig. Did I get that right?
You did. Pilzwiderstandsfähig. It literally means fungal resistant.
Ah, okay, so that's their defining thing.
That's the core idea. These are essentially a newer category of grape varieties specifically bred for that resistance to fungal diseases.
Right. And how are they created? Is this genetic modification we're talking about?
That's a key point. And no, the sources are really clear on this. It's through deliberate traditional crossings. Think classical plant breeding.
Okay.
They take the classic European wine grape species, Vitis vinifera, your Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, Russia.
Famous ones.
Exactly. And they cross them with other Vitis species.
Other Vitis species, where do they come from?
Well, species like Vitis labrusca, rupestris, riparia, even emerensis. These often come from places, maybe North America or Asia, where fungal diseases are just more common.
So they've naturally evolved defenses.
Precisely. They have this natural resistance that poor old Vitis vinifera, in many cases, just doesn't have on its own.
Ah, okay. So it's like borrowing that natural shield from one group and bringing it into the classic wine grape family.
You got it. The goal is really getting the best of both worlds.
Right.
Combining that high quality, the flavors, the aromas we love from Vitis vinifera with the, built-in disease resistance from the other species.
What's interesting is that this idea of crossing grape species, it isn't completely new, is it? Seems like grapevine breeding has often been about tackling crises.
It really has. You can trace this back. Often it's a direct response to some massive challenge in the vineyard.
Like phylloxera.
Exactly. Probably the most famous example. That tiny aphid in the 19th century. It nearly wiped out European vineyards completely.
A total catastrophe. I remember reading about that.
It was devastating. And the solution? Well, it was actually an early, huge example of using genetics from different species. They used resistant American rootstocks.
From those other Vitis species?
Yes, species that had evolved alongside phylloxera and weren't bothered by it. So they grafted the European Vitis vinifera vines onto these American roots.
And that saved the industry. Wow.
It did. So you see the pattern. Using traits from other species to help out Vitis vinifera.
Definitely a historical echo there. So phylloxera gets managed. What was next?
Well, the focus shifted. The next big headaches were fungal diseases, downy mildew, powdery mildew, oidium, big problems.
Still are in many places.
Absolutely. And that led to the first wave of actual hybrid breeding, say, late 19th, early 20th century.
Okay, and this is where the term hybrid maybe got a bit of a bad name.
That's often the perception, yes.
Yeah.
That first generation. Well, they did show resistance, which was the goal, but often the wine quality wasn't quite there.
How so?
Sometimes they had that foxy taste, sort of a strong grapey flavor, maybe like Concord grapes.
Right, great for juice, maybe not for fine wine.
Exactly. Or other profiles that just didn't match up to the complexity people expected from Vitis vinifera. Some found niches, like BRS Lorena in Brazil, but they weren't really competing in the global fine wine market.
Okay, so the PIWR revolution we're discussing now. These newer generations, they're fundamentally different.
Fundamentally. The sources really emphasize this. The newer breeding programs, the ones gaining speed from the mid-20th century, and especially now in the 21st, they're laser-focused on getting both.
Both.
Strong fungal resistance and really high complex wine quality. They're actively breeding away from any undesirable flavors, aiming for nuance, complexity, even terroir expression.
That sounds like it requires some serious science.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't just hit or miss crossing anymore. It's incredibly sophisticated. You get geneticists, vineyard experts, disease specialists, winemakers, all collaborating.
Wow.
They're using advanced selection methods, even things like molecular markers, to spot the promising vines really early on. They understand the resistance mechanisms much better now.
And this work is happening. We're just in Germany?
No, it's a global effort. The sources name key research centers all over. Germany's definitely a leader, with places like Julius Kuhn Institute in Geisenheim, but also Agroscope in Switzerland, research institutes in Austria, Italy, France, even in Embrapa down in Brazil.
So it's a widespread scientific push. Interesting.
It really shows the scale of the effort to find these sustainable solutions.
Okay, so we get what they are, the history, the science. Now, the big question, why do they matter so much right now? What are these benefits that make PIWIs so relevant today?
Well, just look at the challenges growers are facing. The sources lay it out pretty starkly.
Climate change.
Climate change is a huge one. Earlier ripening, which isn't always good. More extreme weather, heat waves, droughts, then sudden heavy rain, hail.
Yeah, seems like farming is getting tougher.
It is. Plus, increased pressure from pests and diseases, water becoming scarce in lots of regions, and, big environmental concerns about using so many chemical sprays, traditionally.
It definitely sounds like growers are under pressure from all sides.
They really are. And PIWIs are emerging as, well, one of the most concrete, promising answers to this really urgent need for more sustainable, more resilient grape growing.
Okay, let's dig into those sustainability benefits. You mentioned less spraying earlier.
This is probably the headline benefit. Because of their natural resistance, vineyards planted with PIWIs can dramatically cut down on fungicide sprays.
How dramatically?
The sources talk about reductions of up to 80 or even 90%.
Yeah.
In some cases, depending on the variety and the climate, maybe even eliminating them completely.
80 to 90%. Wow, that's massive. What does that actually mean on the ground?
It means a whole cascade of good things. Less chemical contamination of the soil, of the water nearby, a lower carbon footprint because tractors aren't going out to spray nearly as often, so less fuel used.
And biodiversity?
Exactly. Better biodiversity in the vineyard. Those beneficial insects, ladybugs, lacewings that get wiped out by broad-spectrum sprays, they can thrive. The soil microbes are healthier. It's a healthier ecosystem overall.
Makes sense. What about the economics for the farmer?
Big savings there, too. Fungicides cost money. Spraying takes time, labor, fuel. Cut that by 80–90%, and you're looking at a significant drop in production costs.
Plus, less risk of losing a crop.
Right. Lower risk of disease, wiping out your harvest means more stable yields, less financial uncertainty year to year.
And you mentioned opening up new regions.
Yes, because they handle humidity better, where mildew loves to grow, and some ripen earlier. They can succeed in places where Vitis vinifera just struggles. Think cooler areas, wetter areas. They could literally redraw the wine map.
Fascinating. Any health angles?
Well, for us drinkers, potentially fewer pesticide residues ending up in the wine. And for the people working in the vineyards, it's a much safer environment with drastically less exposure to those chemicals all season.
So wins all around. Environment, economics, people. How does this relate to that idea of terroir, expressing the place?
That's a really interesting angle the sources bring up. The thinking is, if the vine isn't constantly stressed, fighting off diseases with chemical help, it can put more energy into just being a vine, interacting with its specific patch of earth, its climate, the slope of the land. So potentially, the wines can be a more authentic, unmediated expression of that place, less noise, more signal from the terroir.
Okay, that's a great segue into the wines themselves.
Yeah.
What are some of these key PIWI varieties, the ones we might actually see on a label or should maybe look out for?
Yeah, there's quite a diversity now, both reds and whites, and they each have their own character. Let's maybe touch on a few key ones the sources mention.
Let's start with the reds.
Okay. One of the most established, certainly one you see quite a bit, is Regent.
Regent. Okay.
Pretty widely planted. In the vineyard is known for, say, moderate vigor. The wines usually have this lovely deep ruby, sometimes almost dark purple color.
And the taste, what's the profile?
They generally have good body, noticeable structure, but the tannins are often described as quite soft, kind of velvety, good acidity, well integrated. Often intense dark fruit. Think blackberry, black cherry, sometimes spicy notes like black pepper, maybe subtle earthy hints too. Regent's quite versatile. You see fruity young styles, but also more structured versions that can age.
Ageable. So that busts the old hybrids don't age myth.
Absolutely. Regent is a prime example. You find it a lot in Germany, of course, but also France, Switzerland, Austria, and definitely in those emerging cooler regions.
Interesting. Any other key reds?
Cabernet Cortis is another one generating buzz. And guess what one of its parents is?
Let me guess. Cabernet Sauvignon.
You got it. So it has that famous lineage.
Does that come through in the wine?
Often, yes.
Yeah.
It tends to have an intense ruby color, and it can have firmer tannins than Regent, which points toward good aging potential again. Acidity is usually nicely balanced. Aromatically, you get black soup, black cherry, quesaif, but the sources specifically mention these unique herbaceous notes too.
Like green pepper. That's very Cabernet.
Exactly. Green pepper, maybe black currant leaf. Just sort of echoes its parentage, but in its own way. It's seen as having real potential for complexity in showing its origin, its terroir.
That's cool, that combination of resistance and classic characteristics.
Finding those winning combinations is the whole game. There's also Prior, which is noted for bright color, medium body, fresh red fruit, nice spice, mainly found in Germany. And then you hear about others coming up, like Monarch, Pinot Nova. The list is growing.
Okay, how about the whites?
Well, the star, perhaps the most successful white PIWI globally right now, is probably Solaris.
Solaris. Heard of that one. Why is it so popular?
It's adaptable, it grows well in different spots, but crucially, it ripens early. Very early. That's a massive plus in cooler climates.
Makes sense. What's it like in the glass?
Typically really marked, vibrant acidity, loads of freshness. The body can vary, sometimes lighter, sometimes fuller, depending on how it's made.
And the aromas?
Often quite intense. Floral notes, linden blossom, acacia, and lots of fruit. Peach, apricot, pineapple, green apple. Sometimes, especially if it's a late harvest or sweeter style, you might get spice or honey notes. Really versatile, works for dry wines, off dry.
I can definitely see the appeal for cooler places. Where's it thriving?
Germany's big, particularly in the south, but it's been a huge success across Northern Europe, Denmark, Sweden, the UK, Belgium, also Switzerland, Austria.
Yeah.
It's really taken off.
Any other white standouts we should know?
Johanniter's worth mentioning. It has Riesling in its parentage.
Ah, interesting. Does it taste like Riesling?
It often shares that pronounced acidity, which gives it structure and, again, aging potential. Medium body. Aromas tend towards citrus lemon, lime green apple, and often a distinct mineral streak. It makes really elegant dry wines. Then there's Sauvignon Gris. Its parentage is interesting, too.
Yeah.
A cross involving Cabernet Sauvignon, yes, for a white, and another resistant variety called Bronner.
Cabernet Sauvignon in a white grape. How does that work?
It contributes something to the structure and complexity, apparently. Sauvignon Gris usually has medium body, lovely, vibrant, balanced acidity. Aromas are more delicate pear, white flowers, sometimes intriguing spice notes. Also versatile, good for dry or slightly sweet styles.
It's fascinating how these specific crossings lead to such unique profiles, not just copies.
Exactly. And the sources list others too. Muscaris, which has those grapey, muscat-like aromas, as the name suggests. Felicia, Cabernet Blanc, yes. Another white with Cab Sauv links, often showing herbaceous and citrus notes. There's a whole world opening up.
Clearly lots to explore. And I assume these all behave differently in the vineyard, too.
Oh, for sure. Different leaf shapes, cluster sizes, growth habits. And crucially, they have varying levels of resistance to specific diseases, like downy versus powdery mildew.
Yeah.
That really influences where each one is best suited.
So, okay, these aren't just lab experiments. They're out there being grown, being made into wine. What does the global picture look like? Where are PIWIs actually taking root?
It's really dynamic. It's a growing global movement. And it's all tied into that sustainability drive we talked about.
Europe is leading the charge, I gather.
Definitely the epicenter, yeah.
Yeah.
Both for cultivation and the research. Germany's the pioneer. Still leads in plantings, Pfalz, Spaden, Rheinhessen, even the Mosel. There's a strong environmental consciousness there, so PIWIs fit really well with organic and biodynamic farming, which are popular.
And Germany's neighbors?
Switzerland and Austria are right there, too. Important players, increasing plantings rapidly. They have a strong focus on quality, on environmental responsibility. You see PIWIs making really expressive wines in places like Valais in Switzerland or Styria and Burgenland in Austria.
What about the big traditional countries, France and Italy? You mentioned maybe some initial hesitation?
Oh, absolutely. There was definitely skepticism, centuries of Vitis vinifera tradition, plus that old hybrid stigma. It wasn't an easy sell initially.
But that's changing.
It is, because the pressures, climate change, disease, they're undeniable. So curiosity is growing, innovation is happening. You're starting to see experimentation now in diverse French regions like the Loire, Languedoc, and in Italy too, Friuli, Trentino, even down in Sicily.
Where the disease pressure is high.
Exactly. That's often where the interest starts. It's still early days compared to Germany or Austria, but acceptance is definitely growing. Exploration is happening.
It really shows how serious the challenges are if even the traditional heartlands are looking at new options. What about places that were always difficult for grapes?
That's where PIWIs are a game changer. Colder, wetter climates, think Nordic countries like Denmark, Sweden, or parts of Eastern Europe, Poland, Czech Republic. PIWIs just overcome the traditional hurdles there, allowing actual quality wine regions to emerge with their own identities.
Okay, let's hop across the Atlantic. What's happening in the Americas?
Growing interest there too, definitely. Exploration. In the U.S., you've got research adapting them for specific climates. The University of Minnesota, for example, is famous for breeding cold hardy grapes. Right. The Finger Lakes in New York are exploring diversity. Even in California, they're looking at PIWIs now for sustainability reasons, climate resilience.
And Canada. Cold winters there too.
Very valuable for Canada, especially regions like Ontario and BC, where Vitis vinifera can be really challenging to grow consistently.
What about further south? Brazil, South America, different climate challenges there.
Totally different. Heat, humidity, intense disease pressure, especially fungal. So PIWIs, often locally developed ones like the BRS series from Embrapa in Brazil, are a really strategic tool. They combine that resistance with suitability for hot, humid conditions.
So adaptation everywhere, driven by local needs. Fascinating. Any mention of Australia or New Zealand?
Mentioned, yeah, but on a smaller scale currently. The interest there is also linked to that global search for more sustainable practices.
And are there specific producers who are really championing these grapes? Kind of leading the way?
Yeah, the sources highlight a few examples. People like Jörg Geiger in Germany, he's known for minimal intervention, does a lot with sparkling PIWIs. Or Klaus Preisinger in Austria, who's fully biodynamic and integrates PIWIs seamlessly into his philosophy.
So producers who see them not just as practical, but as fitting a certain ethos.
Exactly. They see them as a way to make really expressive, low-intervention, terroir-driven wines that happen to be sustainable too.
Okay, so that brings us into the winery. How does the fact that these grapes arrive healthier, how does that change the winemaking process?
That's a really key point. Because the grapes have fought off disease naturally and haven't been coated in sprays, they arrive at the winery in much better shape, cleaner.
And that means?
Well, for one thing, you often need much less sulfur dioxide SO2, sulfites, to protect the wine during processing, less risk of oxidation or spoilage microbes taking hold.
So you can add less.
Much less. Or even none at all. It opens the door for those sans sulfure ajouté wines. No added sulfur, which is a big part of the minimal intervention or natural wine movement.
Right.
Make sense? Anything else?
Cleaner fermentations generally. Because there isn't a heavy load of, well, random microbes or residue on the skins, winemakers can be more confident using the native yeasts from the vineyard itself.
Wild ferments.
Exactly. Letting the yeast that lives naturally on those healthy grapes do the work, which again ties into expressing the unique character of the vineyard, the terroir, without adding commercial yeasts.
So what styles of wine are emerging from PIWIs? Is it all one type?
No, definitely not. You're seeing the whole range. For reds, winemaking looks pretty familiar: controlled maceration, fermentation, sometimes oak aging if the wine calls for it.
And the results.
You get everything from intensely colored, fruity, easy-drinking young reds to really structured, complex wines with those softer tannins and bright acidity that can age beautifully.
And the whites, how are they typically handled?
Often gentle pressing, cool fermentation, frequently in stainless steel tanks to really preserve that freshness and those vibrant aromatics.
That stimulating acidity, those clean, intense floral and fruity notes. White fruits, citrus, maybe tropical hints. Often that nice minerality we talked about earlier. Very pure aromas.
What about sparkling? You mentioned Jörg Geiger.
Absolutely. That natural acidity makes them fantastic for sparkling wine. You see both tank method like Prosecco and traditional method like Champagne being used. They make really light, refreshing fizz with fine bubbles and those lovely fresh fruit and flower notes.
Dessert wines too?
Yes, the potential is there for late harvest or other sweet styles. Again, that acidity is crucial for providing balance to the sweetness.
It really sounds like the goal isn't to make, say, a PIWI Chardonnay imitator.
Not at all. Good producers are embracing the unique identity of these grapes. It's about establishing their typicity, their character, expressing the place through the PIWI variety, not trying to mimic something else.
Okay, so for someone listening, maybe intrigued by this deep dive,
Yeah.
wants to try a PIWI wine for the first time, what should they expect? How should they approach it?
Well, I think the number one thing is just
Yeah.
be open-minded.
Right.
These wines do have distinct sensory profiles. They probably won't taste exactly like your go-to Merlot or Sauvignon Blanc. But different doesn't mean worse. It just means different, potentially really interesting and enjoyable.
What are some of those typical characteristics to look for?
Well, as we've said, often a real vibrant freshness, thanks to that good acidity. The aromas tend to be very authentic, pure, clean.
White.
For whites, think clear floral notes. White fruits, citrus, maybe tropical touches, sometimes that minerality. For reds, fresh red and dark fruits, maybe some spice, sometimes those earthy notes. Body, texture that varies hugely, just like with any grape, depending on the variety, where it's grown, how it's made.
And you mentioned purity. What does that mean in the glass?
Because there's generally less intervention needed in the vineyard, less spraying, the wines can often taste remarkably clean. Less risk of certain faults or off flavors that can sometimes come from grapes under heavy disease pressure or affected by residues.
Can these wines actually age? Is that another stereotype we need to ditch?
Absolutely. The sources and the producers themselves are showing that the well-structured PIWIs, the ones with good acidity and maybe some tannin, they definitely have aging potential. They can evolve and gain complexity in the bottle over years, just like quality Vitis vinifera wines.
Okay, what about food? How do they pair? Are they versatile?
Very versatile, actually. For the reds, lighter styles are great with things like chicken, pork, pasta with tomato or mushroom sauces, medium cheeses. The fuller-bodied ones can easily handle grilled red meats, roasts.
And the whites, with all that freshness.
Perfect with seafood, white fish, salads, especially ones with citrusy or herbal dressings. Good with lighter vegetarian dishes, many Asian cuisines like sushi or milder Thai curries, fresh cheeses, creamy cheeses, they work really well.
And the sparkling ones, aperitif time.
Exactly. Great as an aperitif with canapes, light fish dishes, or even with fruit-based desserts. They're really adaptable.
So the message for the listener seems clear. Don't be scared by the hybrid word. Give them a try.
Absolutely. Seek them out. Be curious. Forget any old prejudices. You might just find your new favorite wine style.
Okay, so looking forward, what are the main hurdles PIWIs still face? And what's the future looking like?
Well, probably the biggest challenge is still market acceptance. Just getting past that lingering stigma associated with the word hybrid.
The perception problem.
Exactly. For a lot of consumers, maybe even some people in the wine trade, there's still this underlying assumption that only Vitis vinifera can produce truly great, complex wine.
So how do you overcome that?
Education is key. Just getting the word out. Informing people, consumers, sommeliers, retailers about the modern science, the huge environmental pluses, the health aspects, and honestly letting the quality of the wine speak for itself. Producers and advocates play a huge role there.
What about rules and regulations?
That's another big one. Many traditional wine appellations, the DOs or AOCs, still have rules that limit or completely exclude PIWI varieties.
So they can't label them with the prestigious regional name.
Often not. So there's a real need for the regulatory bodies to catch up with the science in the market. Maybe revise the rules, maybe create new classifications specifically for PIWIs that recognize their value and quality. The innovation is kind of ahead of the paperwork right now.
A classic story. What else is important for the future?
Continuous research, always. Developing new varieties with even better resistance, maybe different flavor profiles, improving the existing ones through things like clonal selection, focusing on resistance to maybe new diseases that emerge with climate change, and figuring out exactly which PIWI works best in which specific terroir. It's ongoing work.
Is this about PIWIs replacing the classics? Is it PIWIs versus Vitis vinifera?
The sources generally suggest it's not really an either. It's more about coexistence, diversification.
Okay.
PIWIs aren't likely to completely replace Cabernet or Chardonnay everywhere, but they can fill really important niches. Those challenging vineyard sites, areas needing drastic spray reductions, producers focused on low intervention. It's about adding tools to the toolbox. Dialogue between growers using both is really important.
So, pulling it all together, what's the big picture future perspective for PIWIs?
I think they're fundamentally tied to the future of sustainable grape growing globally,
Wow.
because they offer a real, practical, proven way to tackle climate change impacts and environmental pressures. Less pesticides, maybe better water use, lower carbon footprint. As the quality keeps getting better and more people plant them and make great wine from them, They're becoming a really integral and genuinely promising part of the whole wine world. The sources call it an evolution that's both necessary and exciting.
That really was a deep dive, wasn't it, into this whole world of PIWI grapes. We've gone from understanding their history, how they were bred out of necessity,
Right, tackling those big challenges.
to seeing the massive benefits they offer today, environmental, economic, health. We've touched on some specific varieties making waves.
For Regent, Solaris, Johanniter, quite a few now.
How their health influences the winemaking, leaning towards minimal intervention.
Lower sulfites, native yeasts.
And what they actually offer in the glass, which is clearly distinct and potentially high quality.
It really is a story of science, meeting tradition, meeting adaptation, all aiming to make sure wine can thrive sustainably in a changing world.
Absolutely. It really highlights that innovation in wine isn't just about fancy winery equipment, is it? It starts right there with the plant material, in the vineyard.
Couldn't agree more. It starts with the grape.
So maybe a final thought to leave everyone with. Just consider how this rise of PIWI grapes might genuinely change what you see on wine shelves over the next few years.
Yeah.
Could they redraw parts of the wine map, maybe create new classic regions we don't even think of yet? And maybe more personally, how does understanding this link sustainability in the field, quality in the bottle, how might that influence your next wine choice?
Will you seek one out?
Will you give a PIWI a try next time you're looking for something new and interesting, something to think about?
Definitely something to consider.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating world of PIWI grapes.